Welcome to the Assistive Technology Considerations for Your Student webinar. I am Carolyn O'Hearn, and I am the AT/AAC specialist from Alt+Shift. And we are collaborating with Michigan Alliance for Families. So I'm so thankful to be able to partner with Michigan Alliance for Families and get the word out on assistive technology. And I've also heard from some of the mentors that this is something that comes up and it's something that's kind of glossed over at IEPs. I just want to let you guys see that there is a disclaimer in compliance, just that a lot of the information expressed isn't necessarily the opinions of Michigan Alliance for Families, the Michigan Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Ed, or Alt+Shift. They also are under compliance with Title IX. And if you have any questions about that, you can read Title IX description below, and any inquiries, there's contact information at the bottom as well. This is the list of the current Board of Education members for Michigan. So we just let you know that before moving on. And these are all part of the slides as well. And if you're not fully aware, or this is your first webinar with Michigan Alliance for Families, just know that they are an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And I am from Alt+Shift, and so a lot of you are from Michigan Alliance for Families, so this isn't your first rodeo with them, but Alt+Shift might be something new. And so we are also a grant-funded initiative through the Michigan Department of Ed Office of Special Education, and we really are a professional learning organization with a focus on impact and collaboration. We work with ISDs, so intermediate school districts throughout the state, to support capacity in providing training and implementation supports that are designed for impact at the student level. So not only are we providing content info, but we're also doing some implementation supports within buildings and school districts and ISDs. We have professional learning opportunities right now in the areas of communication, including literacy, math, assistive technology, and then also creating accessible digital materials. Our website is altshift.education. If you're curious and want to find out more, head on over there. But we're doing some really great things. I'm proud to be part of Alt+Shift as we can connect with the educators that are out there, and getting really to the heart of focusing on that impact for the students. So that's another reason why I'm really proud to be collaborating with Michigan Alliance for Families, because they work extensively with you, with parents, while we work extensively with educators. So having some way to combine and connect these two really important support groups for our students can only be beneficial in the long run. Today, we're going to be focusing on a few different outcomes. So I'll be talking about what does the law say about assistive technology, what is AT and who could actually benefit from it, what does it mean to consider AT? We talk about that a lot. You know, is AT considered, or are you considering it? Or as we hear in every IEP, AT is always considered, and by law we have to consider it, but what does that actually mean? Where and how can AT be documented in the IEP? And then if all of this sounds good and you're really starting to think about your own child, how do you start that conversation with your child's IEP team? What do you do with this information moving forward? So what does the law say? According to IDEA 2004, assistive technology, an assistive technology device is any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a person with a disability. Okay, and then there's also a definition for assistive technology services, which is any service that directly assists the person with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. So notice that neither of these definitions limit you to one location. We're not saying only in the classroom. So we need to start thinking outside of the classroom. The playground, the cafeteria, the gym, the hallway, when our students become transition age and we're thinking about where they're going to be working. And for some of our students who are in school until they're 26, you know, you've got that 18 to 26 year range where we're trying to do customized employment and get the students out into a place of employment. So what kind of technology or supports do they need out there? And also thinking about the bus. That's another school place that a lot of times is overlooked, and we need to think of, especially our students who have complex communication needs. How are they communicating on the bus? Some of our students have really long bus rides, and they might not be able to say much for a 45-minute bus ride because they don't have access to the technology or the supports that they need. So really starting to think of what assistive technology is and where it could be. So looking at assistive technology device, this definition is wordy and it holds a lot of information. So we're going to break it down for a second. It's any item, piece of equipment, or product system. It means literally that, guys. It can be any item, anything can be assistive technology. I've heard of people using Pringles cans as assistive technology because that is where they put a student's visual schedule. And when the student's schedule piece is done, they put the piece right into the Pringles can. You could use highlighters. You could use Post-it notes. It could be something as simple as a pencil grip. It is any item that is used to support the student becoming more functional with their skills. And we'll talk about that in a second. The next part of the definition identifies where the tool or device comes from. You can buy it and use it as it comes. You can buy it and modify it, or you can build it yourself. You can go into your school's art closet or your own art room at home and your own art box and really create something that could help your child function a little bit better in an area that they're struggling in. And so it could be free, it could be cheap, or it could be something expensive depending on their need. We had one student that couldn't access his locker. He had cerebral palsy. He was in a wheelchair, and he wanted to get in his locker like the rest of his friends could. And so we finagled some Velcro and some rope, and honestly, it was the simplest thing because we found it right in the art supply closet, and we didn't have to worry about modifying the locker itself because lockers change every year, so it was going to be someone else's locker next year. But it was something that then he could access his locker and reach in and get all the supplies he needed right from his locker without the help of a person. Assistive technology is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities. So what do we want this item to actually do? Well, we want it either to increase their skills, keep their skills at the same level, or improve the skills that they already have. So we want them to be functional skills. It could be communication, it could be daily living, so grooming, bathrooming, feeding yourself. That's a big one for some of our students with higher needs is, we want them to be able to feed themselves and be more independent. So these are all functional capabilities in addition to academic performance as well. So how do we want them to write better paragraphs? Do we want them to organize their thoughts? Do we want them to be able to self-manage, know that the bus comes at 8:30 in the morning and they need to set a timer to make sure they walk out to the bus stop by 8:20. All of these things are helping them become more independent and more functional as adults as we move them towards adulthood. And assistive technology directly relates to a person with a disability. It's a wide range of disability. It is not just those who are impacted severely by their disability, but those who qualify are as eligible as such. When we're looking at assistive technology services, again, it's any service that directly assists the person. And this could be starting with evaluating and assessing. So we can look at what the need is to begin with. Who is the student? What are we asking them to do? And where's that barrier? Acquiring the device or tool. So checking it out from the Alt+Shift lending library or looking at their own lending library within the ISD. Finding what tools are available to support that student and getting it. So purchasing, leasing, borrowing it, getting a free trial, that sort of thing. Customizing or modifying. So like our students, if they're not a one-size-fits-all, so the tools themselves are not a one-size-fits-all either. So the person who's providing AT services also has to customize and modify these tools. coordinating with other therapy or services. A lot of our students are getting outside speech therapy or OT or PT or ABA. And so making sure that we're coordinating with these therapies and making sure that the tool, if it needs to be used across settings, is being used across settings. Training the student and the student's family. You can't just hand a tool over to a student and say, all right, there you go, have at it. There needs to be some instruction in there. And when it's appropriate, instructing the family on how to use it as well. If this is something like a timer or like something that could be used in their daily life after school, the family should be able to know how to use it as well, be instructed and such. Communication devices are something that comes to my mind. If I want a student to use a communication device, I'm not just going to teach the student at school and teach the staff at school, but if I want that device to go home so the student can truly have a voice, we want to be able to train the parents and siblings too, those who are going to be communicating with him or her. And then training other adults. So making sure that, again, those employers are aware of the technology and the supports that they need, making sure that other educators are, caregivers, mom and dads, you guys work a lot of the time. So the people who are with your children when you're not there, making sure that they know what these tools and supports are. So if they're doing their homework, can the caregiver or the babysitter or Nana who's watching your child help support your child in using that tool and getting that task accomplished. Another part of the law, I talked about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act earlier, and a big part of that is FAPE. It's a free and appropriate public education. So all of our students get to have a free and appropriate public education, and we needed to make sure that it's tailored to their needs and is preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. That free part is big for our students because we want it to be no cost to parents. It's part of education. So if the team at the IEP team at school is determining that a tool is needed for the student, the school is responsible for paying for this device. We have used Medicaid and private insurance for students in order for them to acquire their own tools and their own devices. So wheelchairs and accessible communication, that sort of thing, but we always have to get the parent consent. So I wouldn't write an AAC evaluation, a report for this $25,000 device, asking my students' insurance to pay for it without talking to the parent first. But again, it all goes into, what is the right tool, and the school is the one that ultimately is paying for it. And with that appropriate piece, that A of FAPE, it's a student by student basis. So it's not looking into the lending library or looking on the shelf and seeing what we already have and making it work for the student. A lot of times you can, like, oh, this is the right tool, it's perfect, we just have to customize it a little. But for some of our students, they need a very specific tool or they need a very specific switch. And so at that point, we have to look into making sure that it's appropriate for the student and not just what we already have. For some of our students that don't have IEPs, to have an IEP, that means you're eligible for services that meet the definition of one of, I think it's 13 here in Michigan, several disabilities. So autism spectrum disorder, cognitive impairment, visual impairment, severe multiply impaired. Those are all types of traumatic brain injury. That's another one. So if your student doesn't qualify for that and to qualify to receive special education services, but still has a disability, the doctor said, oh yes, your son has autism, or oh yes, they have a TBI, but they're performing well in school, they still might be eligible for accommodations through a 504 plan. So that's something to look into as well. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act ensures that a student with a disability still has equal access to an education. So they might not qualify for special education services. They're doing well in gen ed, but maybe they need a couple accommodations or some extra support. And so that 504 plan would help with that. So what is AT and who could benefit? We found the huge lengthy definition, but didn't necessarily cover what is it and who could benefit from it. Remember that AT can be anything, right? IDEA requires that you have to consider AT. at every IEP meeting. And then AT also includes services like training and actually acquiring the device itself. AT is not something that's medically, surgically implanted, or a medical device like a cochlear implant or a feeding tube. That's not AT. And AT can also not be a person. That we're trying to move it so our students are more independent, not reliant on a person to accomplish their job. And we want them to feel that they can do it. Give them the confidence that you can accomplish these tasks. You don't need me to do it. Because a lot of times our students will see an adult do something and they just recognize, okay, cool, you've been doing it forever, and now you can do it better than I can. And we don't want that. We want the student to have some pride and self-esteem, and to build that experience as a learner so that they can move and be as independent as possible. Who would benefit from assistive technology? Possibly everyone. Those with learning disabilities, with attention deficit disorder, those with environmental sensitivities, traumatic brain injury, autism, those with hearing loss, with visual impairments, with physical limitations, and those with complex communication needs, so speech and language impairments. Anything could benefit anyone. If you see that your child is struggling in a certain area, they could possibly benefit from assistive technology. Assistive technology can assist with motor coordination, time management, attention, organizational skills, processing speed, social skills, verbal expression, memory, and a whole gamut of other things. So I don't want you guys to think that this is, again, for those most severely impacted students, those severely impacted kids. It could really be as simple as, I need a visual schedule, or I need to set a timer, or I need to write something down in my planner. So I need to have access to a planner to remember when something is due. That is something that we provide a lot of our students, and I'll talk about universal design for learning later. But those planners, once you stop providing these planners to these students, or maybe the paper planner isn't the best option for your child, something else needs to be put in place instead, so that they can still stay on top of their assignments and self-manage their work. Here are some examples of low-tech or non-electronic assistive technology. Again, these are more than likely going to be the cheaper end of the spectrum, but a highlighter, to highlight the main points of what you're reading, or maybe it's a strip of yellow paper so that you can concentrate on where you're reading or what you're reading, and if you're reading text. The calendar and planner, like we talked about, magnifying glass, and actually glasses are a form of assistive technology as well. So if a student wears glasses or has a hearing aid, that's all AT as well, and that needs to be documented in the IEP, and we'll talk about that too. A flashlight. So if you want to draw their attention to certain areas, you can have a flashlight. Paper and pen. Maybe you need to write down your thoughts before verbally saying them, or maybe you need a graphic organizer, something to kind of organize your thoughts before you write it into a paragraph. That's AT. A pencil grip. Think about going into Walmart or Meijer or Kmart or Big Lots and finding those really cheap pencil grips. That could be assistive technology, because it's going to help your student hold the pencil the correct way and help them be more functional in physically writing. A slant board, that's one of the items that's pictured. It's the top picture, and that just it can help with raising it so the student can actually see what the paper is and what letters they're forming and what they're actually writing, where the lines are, but also help with posture, because sometimes our students lean over the table, and so if you want to help them with their posture, you can do a slant board with as well. That slant board also has a clipboard attachment to it, so the paper stays where it needs to be. And that, again, is another form of low-tech AT, because if your hand isn't holding that paper steady, it's really hard to write without keeping that in place. A page turner, that's at the bottom of the page, or the bottom of the slide. That's another example. So if a student can't physically turn one page at a time, they make different page turners so that you can still engage in reading a book and turning the pages of a book, again, without having someone do it for you. And then a door pull. So something as simple as the locker example that I gave you guys earlier. It could be just a rope attached to a pull door. It's something that allows our students and individuals to actually access where they need to go without having someone open the door for them. Some examples of high-tech or electronic assistive technology, electric wheelchairs. That's one too. And I think that that's often overlooked by a lot of people when you think of AT. It's that big item that, oh, well, PT covers it or the doctor covers it. Yeah, but we still need to make sure that it's in working order and documented in the IEP to make sure that he has access to mobility. But they have different ways to access an electric wheelchair these days. So you can have a toggle switch, or you can do like a little knob, like a joystick. You have a touchpad. Some students use touchpads, and then they also have various ways to control speed and the terrain you're working on. So you could be confined to just a sidewalk or the classroom hallway, but I've seen some wheelchairs with all-terrain wheels, and they can access the playground because then they can get onto the wood chips and making sure that they can go where their peers are going to. Keyboard alternatives is another example that's pictured in the top of this slide as well. So for someone who only has use of a hand, maybe can't do the whole wide range of moving their arm to access a full QWERTY keyboard, you can have it all in the space of just having one hand without having to move your arm and wrist as well. Screen readers, speech to text, word prediction, these are all things that are examples, and a lot of them are built into our phone. But if you wanted to type something, but maybe you have limited functionality of your hands, or maybe you don't like the tactile feel of a keyboard, some of our students are pretty sensitive to different textiles, you could do speech to text. So they talk, it turns it into text, and then they can send it via email or text, or create a Word document. Word prediction, so to help with typing out sentences and paragraphs. So you just start writing the word that's pictured below. That's a clicker example below. And so you start writing FAV, and it brings up a whole bunch of words that could probably fit in. So it'll help with writing and being more fluent with writing. Some AAC devices are high tech, some are low tech. There's also software and apps. So seating and mobility, that's also assistive technology. So making sure students can participate and not have, gravity working against them, or making sure that their bodies are symmetrical, making sure that they have the opportunities to walk down the halls and not lose their muscle tone as they get older. So making sure that they can still navigate their environment. Vision, this is a magnifier. So the gentleman in the top left is using a screen magnifier to read the fine print. And then the lady down in the bottom right is using a Braille keyboard. So she can type into a computer and be able to participate that way. So she can still send emails and read emails as well. This is an example for writing. So the left side, you can see that there are a lot of different supports right here just for writing. There's that clipboard I was talking about. There are pencil grips. There's a fidget on that zebra pencil. And so that's just something to keep them focused, because some of our students can't sit still and focus. They need to be constantly moving. But there's also something called wiki sticks or bendaroos. It's wax-covered yarn, and they're kind of forming guides for where to form those letters, so that the red one is the top, the blue one is the bottom, so that the student knows where to write the letters and not all over the page, or not too teeny, just to work on both spacing and sizing of letters. And then on the right-hand side, it's various lined paper. So again, where are you writing? Are you writing just on one line versus two? Are you writing on the whole line? That sort of thing. I briefly covered word prediction already. So read and write by text help is one example, and Clicker 7 is another example. Read and write also gives you access to definitions and picture dictionaries. So if you highlight a word that you're not sure of while you're reading, that the example that they have there is earth. So what is the earth? And then also different pictures of it. So if you don't have a picture there, what is it? So you can kind of get an idea. allows you to highlight in various colors. It reads the screen for you too. And so it's just a really great tool to have. It is about $145 for a license. A lot of schools will have it, and I know that it's a Chrome extension as well. So that's just one example. There are many word prediction apps out there. So I don't want to say, go get this one or demand your school get this one, because it really depends on the student. And your school might have one that's similar that would work for your students' needs as well. And then Clicker 7 is over on the right-hand side. And like I said earlier, it was talking about word prediction and, figuring out if it's present tense versus past tense, that sort of thing. So it has a sharp bit on the tip of its beak, CA, and all the words that they could possibly have were popped up right there. So called is right there. Another area that we often don't think about, and I kind of brought attention to it earlier, is feeding. A lot of our students, we want to make sure that they can feed themselves and have access to that. So there's a scooper bowl on the left-hand side, and that goes for about $8, so it's not too terribly expensive. And then there's also the adapted utensils over on the right-hand side, and those go, they could be pretty expensive. They can be about $24 a piece. Or you could put foam over it, so like a little pool noodle, put it over the handle of a feeding utensil, and that allows the student to then grip a little bit better and hold on to it and have something to grasp, instead of that thin handle that most of our silverware has. For communication, there's a whole gamut of communication tools out there as well, and I could probably talk to you guys for 70 minutes on that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on the fact that there is that wide gamut. So the communication, there's a high-tech communication tool in the upper left-hand corner that's Proloquo to Go on an iPad. If you look directly below it, that's just writing. So some of our students and some of our kids, if you want to say something, they can write it down. That's acceptable communication. There's a low-tech communication board in the center, and that they use at hospitals. So, what's your name, what's your phone number? They can also use that. Actually, they use that from the EMS and paramedics. So if it's someone is not communicating verbally, you can point to these different symbols, and kind of, they can help you figure out, yes or no, or my foot hurts, or I'm pregnant, just so that they get all the information they need without just jumping to conclusions. And then on the right-hand side are examples of a low-tech communication book called POD, which is Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display. It really focuses on the why we communicate. So the pragmatics, I'm telling you something, I'm expressing anger, I'm expressing an opinion, that sort of thing. So that's over on the right-hand side. There are so many communication apps out there, so I don't want you guys to think that this is it, this is the end all be all, because it is definitely not. There's Touch Chat, there's Speak for Yourself, there's LAMP Words for Life, just off the top of my head. There's Cough Drop. So there are several apps out there, and that's really where the AT team and the AAC specialist or the speech path can help figure out what program would be best for your child.
As far as learning, a variety of tools could assist your child in accessing and learning the curriculum. In math, for example, manipulatives can help your child understand abstract concepts. Some students may need help accessing the environment. So if they have limited fine motor skills or if they have minimal verbal skills, they may need a switch or several switches to call out to gain someone's attention, or to turn on a blender, or to turn on a light. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a variety of types of switches. And then on the right side is the PowerLink 3. That's actually outdated. There's a PowerLink 4 now. And what's great is that you can plug in something like a blender and connect it to a switch so that a student can puree or chop something with the blender without having to physically push the button down with their finger. Because, some of those blender buttons are pretty tough.
Executive functioning, that is just making sure that a student can get through their day with organization and memory. That organization piece is huge. So the first one on the left is a visual schedule. I've used that for my own 3-year-olds. So really, we all benefit from visual schedules. I have my calendar, but for some of our students, they need to know what's coming next. In the middle, that's a Watchminder 3. And it vibrates to kind of keep you on task, keep you focused. You can set it at different intervals, and that's about $80. I think there was a special running for it now where it's about 70, but it's something that it just looks like a regular watch. You just wear it, you set it for, you can set different alarms or different codes. So that one says pay attention. So it vibrates, it draws your attention to that, and then, oh shoot, I have to pay attention. And then the right-hand side is just the built-in calendar and planner with reminders as well. One huge advance in AT is Alexa, Siri, and Google. What can't they do? Now they can spell words, they can do math problems, they can help you stay on schedule, they can add items to grocery lists, they can play music. A lot of them are compatible with communication devices too. So if I can't say, hey Alexa, play Lion King, because that's what I want to watch because Disney Plus is out now, I can type that into my speech generating device. It says, hey Alexa, play Lion King on Disney Plus, and it'll be programmed to then turn on the app and play the movie. So you can also play music with it. And a lot of it, I mean, the one on the right-hand side is Google Home. And a lot of these are now being connected into being smart home features. So you can turn on lights or lock doors or close garage doors, which is really enabling a lot of our students when they become adults and they are living on their own to be more independent. These are some of the things that are built in. And so that's the other piece of thinking of assistive technology is what do you already have and what features could you look into to then move forward? I mean, if some of our students, they just need to have predictive text on when they're typing, you can speak the screen or speak the selection or highlight content so you can see what you're reading. I know I've used text to speech on it. It'll read my screen if I'm trying to read an email and also get ready at the same time. So that's not assistive technology to me because I don't have a disability. I don't need that to function, but it's definitely more of a convenience factor for me. A lot of our kids don't want to be seen as different. So if we could help them with voice to text or with predictive text and it's on a phone or an iPad or something that all of their peers have already, that's something to really consider when we move forward with what AT they could be using. Some of our classrooms have adopted UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, and I've got a slide coming up on that. But really, they're focusing on making materials accessible for all students, but these materials and these items might actually help some students more than others. So if we think about audiobooks, if we think about recording lectures or using word processors, these are really great tools that, I mean, they're convenient for us, right? But they might be necessary and be really impactful for some of our students. So really thinking about, is it something that the student needs in order to improve, maintain, or increase their functional capabilities? UDL is Universal Design for Learning, and that's just, the definition is that it's flexible approaches for input, engagement, and expression of learning based on the student needs. So the way that the student is accessing curriculum, it's for all students. There's different ways to engage students. There might be flexible seating, so you could sit on a beanbag chair or a wobble stool or on a carpet square or at a typical desk. There's definitely a way to sit in a classroom, and it doesn't all have to be in a desk. I've seen some classrooms where they have couches, and that seems like the best classroom I would want to be in too. I'd want to be comfortable when I'm learning. But there are built-in supports that can be used by any student, and the student controls their use. So I don't want to sit on the couch today, I want to sit on the stool, and that's okay. We're not requiring them to pick one and stick with it forever. It's all on how you are feeling that day and what's going to be the best for you going forward with learning. Teachers do monitor the progress and might add or remove feature based on those progress. So if students aren't using the stools properly, or they're using these little cube chairs as pillows for pillow fights, those might disappear because they're not being used for what they're supposed to be used for. But a lot of classrooms are moving towards UDL. But when does UDL become AT? We have to think about that because some of our students in elementary school, that's really where we see a lot of the UDL classrooms, because it's easy to set up your room in various ways of, yep, sit in the tote as where you want to read, or go sit on a carpet square, or go sit over here. But some of these items might actually become AT for our students. And we have to think that if your child leaves that classroom, so you guys move, or they move from 3rd to 4th grade and have a new teacher, and they don't have access to an item that was helping them access the curriculum, we might be considering that as AT. And if that's something that we notice, we need to add it to the IEP of the 504 plan as an accommodation. So that big question, if we have to consider it, what does it even mean to consider AT? This is the special factors section of an IEP. It's usually right in the beginning of the meeting. And I know I'm guilty of doing this as someone who has led IEP meetings before. It's just kind of glossed over. At every IEP, we have to consider the communication needs and assistive technology needs for the student. Check, check. And that's really where it goes, and that's where that conversation ends. We don't really talk about it. We might talk about it later with other student or with other pieces of the student, other pieces of the curriculum and different therapies, but it's not addressed specifically as assistive technology. It's in the special factors, one and done, you check the box. And one thing we really need to get away from is just checking the box. So parents, you'll hear that and maybe you'll start to notice like, oh, well, we have to consider it at every IEP. You can ask, how did you consider it? Or where are we going to see that it comes up again later in the IEP? Because there's a good chance that if a student has an IEP, AT could benefit them in some way. Again, it's student by student basis, so it's not every student, but there's a good chance that they could probably benefit from something or an additional support. So yeah, AT considerations required in every IEP, and it's collaborative decision making. It's reviewing what we already know about the student. It's maybe collecting additional information, but not right at that second. We're not saying, okay, well, in order to consider this, we need to get data. It's, we don't have enough information. We need to go collect data. It's deciding whether or not AT is needed and then figuring out what that AT is. So the 5 possible outcomes of AT consideration are that we've considered AT and it's not necessary at this time. So that's good. Maybe your student's doing great and the supports that are already built into the classroom they're using and they don't need anything that's tailored to them specifically. Awesome. The second one is we've considered AT and find that the student has not had access and may benefit from AT. So again, this isn't saying that they need it right the second, but they could benefit from it and they haven't had access to it. So we need to explore it a bit more. Number 3 is we've considered AT and the AT currently in place is working and the student needs are being met. Hallelujah, that is a great outcome. That's what we want to see. But technology changes, student need changes, the curriculum changes. So anytime that we're seeing some big change in an area of our students' lives, we need to start thinking, okay, well, is this tool still the right one? As far as technology changes, just because the newest iPad comes out or the newest iPhone comes out, because that happens all the time, or something bigger and better and newer comes out, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the student needs. If the device is still working, the tool is still working, the software, the app is working, stick with it. Now, if you're lugging around this box that only carries a charge for 5 minutes of the day and you need it for 6 hours of your day, that's when you really need to be considering something new. But if the tool is in place and it's working, move forward and go ahead with it. That'd be great. Number 4, like I said, there's 5 possible outcomes. So number 4 is that we've considered AT, and while the student's using AT, they might have additional needs. So this is when we're starting to see some of those academic changes or growth changes, like maybe they're growing up and they have some additional needs. And so, okay, they're using some things, they have a visual schedule, they are using timers, but now we're also seeing the need for a communication device. We were getting by with some of their intelligible speech for a while, but now we need something to supplement their spoken language because we don't understand. They're trying to put together really long sentences. We don't know what they're trying to say. We need some extra supports here, that sort of thing. And then number 5 is something that I think a lot of teams are scared to approach, but it's a good sign. It's saying we don't have enough information. We need more information. So notice that all of these possible outcomes said that we've considered AT. So at the team, you have to consider AT. You have to. AT consideration is not an evaluation. So again, it's brief. I'll compare them on I think it's the next slide, or a couple slides away. It's not an evaluation. We're not sitting there. The consideration piece can be as quick as a discussion. Okay, so you're sitting at an IEP, and that's why there are those 5 outcomes. We've considered AT, and shoot, we don't have enough information. We need to go back to drawing board and figure out what AT could support the student. But it could be something that's as quick as, yeah, the AT is in place and it's working and it's great. But it needs to be considered, and it needs to be more than just checking that box. Often when we're thinking of AT consideration, there are some common errors, and that one of them is it's only considered for students with severe disabilities. So again, when we're thinking of those with OT, PT, speech, a lot of the times these 3 services will come in, or the same thing with VI or deaf and hard of hearing services. These ancillary supports, these itinerants will come in and talk about the assistive technology that they're using, but maybe not how it's related back to the goals. Or how it could be related back into the classroom, and how this technology is impacting these students in a positive way, and needs to be carried over, and what training's involved. So for some of our students, I worked in a center program. We considered it for every student because these students had some really high needs. But thinking about our gen ed programs, and so for some of our students who are pushed into the general education, which is what we want them with their gen ed peers if that's appropriate, what sort of AT helps them access that curriculum. So we need to make sure we're considering it for more than just those with severe disabilities. Number 2 is that no one is knowledgeable about AT on the IEP team. And that one's tricky because there's a lot to know about AT. And so there's no way that someone on the IEP team could know everything about assistive technology. But you should at least know your field. And actually, for special education teachers, in order for them to get their endorsement, they have to be somewhat knowledgeable in AT. And again, it's not knowing everything. It's just knowing that we can say, oh, there might be a support for that. Let's look into it, and then do the evaluation process. Instead of just saying, oh, well, we don't really know, so we're just going to check the box and say we considered it and it's fine, because that is a no-no. Number 3 is that the team doesn't use a consistent process based on data about the student environment or tasks to make decisions. Maybe it's a thorough, thoughtful process for one student, but it's just kind of glossed over for another, or we're just thinking about what this student may or may not benefit from, instead of really looking at the data and saying, well, they made progress on their goals this year. Why? Was there a support in place, and do we need to have this support continue or added to the IEP so it's there? Or why didn't they make the progress that we thought they would make in a year? We write these goals to be manageable. We really want them to be moving forward. What didn't allow them, or what maybe could be in place so that they could make the progress that they need. So number 4 for common errors is that consideration is limited to those items that are familiar to team members or what's available in the district. Again, we need to think that it's a student by student basis. So we can't just say, well, this student gets a Chromebook because that's what we have. We bought Chromebooks, we're a Chromebook school. If the app that is best going to suit your student, or if the program is only available on iOS and the team decides that this app is the one they have to go forward with, then the school has to do something with that iOS app. A lot of times you will find something that's comparable, it's comparable between a Chromebook and a Windows computer and an Apple or an iOS product. A lot of the tech designers out there now are trying to make it so that there's an equal playing field regardless of what tool you're using. But they can't come back and say, well, we're a Chromebook district, so we have to use something that's available on Chrome. You can't. If there's a tool that fits your student, then that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Perfect. You looked at that first because it is what you had, but As soon as they realize, shoot, there's nothing that's made for Chromebooks that'll fit the need, then they have to start looking outside of what they have available. There are lending libraries within ISDs, so within counties, and also Alt+Shift has a lending library as well. And so if they wanted to trial something before buying it, that actually is the best way to go about it, because then you're not paying, $400 for this software program and then realizing that it's not the right software program. So you need to go buy another $150 software program. You can trial a lot of these things through the lending library. That being said, with the lending library, it has to be from the educators. So parents, unfortunately, you cannot check out things from the lending library. Again, most ISDs will have their own. I know Kent ISD has their own lending library. Oakland Schools has their own lending library. I believe Wexford Misaki does too. So it all depends on where you are in the state and to what extent your lending library holds items. But Alt+Shift also has a lending library that we lend things out statewide to educators for 6 to 8 weeks. So there are options, so teams don't only consider what's available in their own home. Number 5 is that team members fail to consider access to the curriculum and the IEP goals and determining if AT is required. So what are these goals? What do we want our students to make progress in? We want them to make progress, obviously, in these goal areas. And so is AT part of that goal? And if AT is not needed, we need to say why. The student's fine with the processes that are in place. The student no longer needs a highlighter. They've opted not to use it and have done well, and we've done a trial saying that they don't need it anymore. Why don't they need it? That sort of thing. Who can consider AT? Anyone on the IEP team. So parents, you're part of that IEP team. You can absolutely help consider things. Students can help, teachers, ancillary staff, other people who are actively involved in the student's life. I worked with a paraprofessional who was very savvy on all of the new Apple updates and knew about all of the updates and thought about the students, saying, hey, here's a new update. They made this new accessibility feature. Let's trial it with so-and-so. So it could be anybody. And you just have to start thinking about how you can use these tools for our students. Here is that comparison chart I was talking about between consideration and evaluation. It's essentially saying that evaluation is going to be a lengthier process. Consideration can be quick. The evaluation is going to be lengthier. Parents, you can request an evaluation at any time, especially if you're seeing a need. I will talk about how do I get this started? Don't bum rush your schools and start demanding evaluations. Please hold off just for a second. But you can request one, and staff could suggest one, and it might involve the read process, which I'll get to in the next slide. But if you're seeing a need, you're seeing your student slip in certain areas, or they're getting frustrated in certain areas, that might be a good sign to say, we might need to check something out. READ stands for Review of Existing Evaluation Data, and it doesn't typically require a formal meeting. You can just get the READ process. It's an evaluation. It's essentially saying we checked the background knowledge that we have and all the data that we already had. We checked and reviewed the files. We don't have enough information. We need to evaluate. So some ISDs require a read. Some ISDs don't require a read to get the AT process going. And so that's where that bottom bit of the ISDs have an AT process. It might not be publicly available. It might be a process that some staff follow. So you really just have to talk with your team of, how do I get this ball rolling? Is there a state mandated process for the AT process? No, there is not anything that is state mandated. It just has to be in compliance with the law. So you're going to see districts vary. So from district to district, from building to building, sometimes from ISD to ISD. Every ISD has to have a plan. You have to have something in place, but it is going to be whatever the district decides. It's not something that's consistent or mandated between districts. I included the slides of the SETT framework. This is just one piece of an evaluation process. A lot of school districts are using the SETT. It stands for Student Environment Task and Tools. And you look at who is the student, what is the environment, what are we asking the student to do, are their tasks, and then checking out what tools could possibly fit that need. So just really remembering that we're looking at the tools last, because we want to match these tools based on features. So once you pick a tool, you still need to keep collecting data on it. Is it still working? What is the training going to look like? How are we going to train the student? How are we going to train the teachers? How are we training the family, if appropriate? And then what is the data collection going to look like? And when are we going to review it and update the plan? How are we going to know if it's working or not working?
As far as determining where the AT will be used, this is something that the IEP team decides. So if it's something that the student needs to be independent outside of the classroom, there needs to be a discussion as to how the student will have access to something similar at home if it's not the true device. For example, if the student uses a word processor at school or a computer or a desktop at school, and the student can't take that entire device home, how are they going to have access to something like word processing to complete their homework assignments when they're not in the school building? Same thing goes for a communication device. If the school's policy is that a device that's being trialed, or a very expensive Tobii Dynavox speech generating device, needs to stay at school, the student still needs access to a robust communication system, to a robust vocabulary when they're not in the school building at all. We have a lot to say when we're at home with our families, and so we don't want to keep the words only at school.
As far as documenting in the IEP, there are so many different places, guys, you can document it. We talked about special factors already. That was checking the box. In the PLAAFP, it should be specifically addressed. So this is section 2, the present level of academic achievement and functional performance is a lengthy way of saying PLAAFP. But you might see it embedded within a few other documented areas. So updates from the teachers. I know as a speech pathologist, I would write in what tools they were using. And for this section, and in the IEP, we don't list specific tools by their name. We describe their features, because we never know when something new is going to come out that fits the student better. Or if we say that the student has to use Proloquo to Go on an iPad, but then that iPad breaks or the iPad's lost or the screen breaks or something isn't working, and we find a substitute tool for them, it needs to be okay. If we list the tool in the IEP, you're confined to that tool. So you won't see a lot of school districts writing the tool's name specifically in there. They might say student is currently using and list a product, but you're going to go off of the features that the product is, just in case they do move districts, and they have something that might work better as well. In the goals, we need to make sure that the whole goal section looks into increasing, maintaining, or improving functional skills. So what's keeping the student from achieving the goal? What supports do they need? And you can include AT as part of that goal. So for example, utilizing a graphic organizer, the student will. Utilizing an AAC device and spoken language, the student will. So we want to make sure that we know how they're achieving their goal. The student will follow their schedule utilizing a timer, something like that, so it can still be part of the goal. For supplementary aids and services, this is typically section 5. I want to just draw your attention to the specialized equipment needs. So that's talking about wheelchairs or software, AAC devices, restroom equipment, utensils, as well as the materials needed. So it doesn't need to be large print, doesn't need to be scanned notes. Under presentation, that would be something like taped or recorded lectures, so the student could go back and listen to the notes later or listen to the lecture later. There are all sorts of different ways to add AT within section 5. And then section 7 is related services. So a lot of times if your student is receiving direct therapy services, that would be listed here. And as a speech therapist, again, I would always be listing that it would include the training, because as a speech therapist, as someone who has more expertise in AAC devices, I would want to make sure that I'm talking about and giving some time to do training with the student and training with staff on what these devices are, and how to utilize it throughout the day so the student has access to their communication system. And just the importance of documenting it, it ensures that your child receives the accommodations that they need to access the curriculum. If you moved tomorrow and these supports aren't in the IEP, the student might not immediately receive the accommodations that they need. So that really is the end goal. Even if you don't think you'll ever move again, I found a house that I'm never moving from. This is my dream home. You don't know, the circumstances might arise, or the district boundaries might change. So if they move tomorrow, would they still have access to the tools and supports that they need? And that's why it's important to document it in the IEP. So how do we start the conversation with your child's IEP team? Ask. If you have an IEP meeting that's coming up soon, you can absolutely ask, are there any devices or programs that could support your child reaching a goal? Could instruction in the use of a tool help them become more independent? What's holding them back from progressing in these curricular transition goals? And what does my child have access to during the day that appears to help them in, math or reading or writing? Having these conversations, you don't have to be rushed through these IEP meetings. This is your time to advocate for your student and ask those questions and see if AT is being implemented, and maybe it's just not being discussed as assistive technology at this time. You can explore tools and adaptations at home too. Does your child have access to a phone? Could the built-in features or apps, timers or planners, help your child make progress in certain areas? And test them. Try a visual timer or visual schedule. Try the planner. Try larger print. You might see that yes, it helps, or no, that doesn't make a difference, or we need to adapt something else. And then you can bring it to the team saying, hey, I'm seeing that my student or my child does really well with changes in their schedule when I set a timer, or when I explain it, or when I put it in their planner, that sort of thing. I know as a speech path, I liked it when parents came in saying, hey, I tried this already and it seemed to work. Could we try this too? Versus just coming in and demanding something. You could always request a meeting too. So if you're noticing that your child's struggling in an area, they're not making progress that you would hope that they would be making, maybe their IEP isn't until March, you can ask about the consideration process, express your concerns or ideas. I'm not suggesting demanding an evaluation just in general. That's the last thing I want to suggest, because if you can bring in examples or ideas, or if you have a specific area in mind that you think your student is struggling in, it's easier to get more specific and get those specific needs met versus just saying, I want an AT evaluation, because we need to really start thinking about what are those areas and hone in on where we want the student to make progress. Why is there such a mystery surrounding AT? Guys, it changes often. So we might not know about new tools or apps, which is why it's always fun if you can come in and say, hey, I learned about this tool. Have you heard about it? As a speech path, as someone who likes learning, no, I haven't heard about it. How could we use it? There's a lack of process. So just not knowing having confidence in knowing the process, or having confidence in knowing what tools are out there. Prioritizing what's important. Some of our students go through some behavioral challenges that shifts to be a priority versus are they following their schedule independently at that point. So there are going to be shifts in priorities, and it's okay, because we'll shift back to that once we kind of manage that priority at that time. And then differences in environments may not draw attention for need of AT. So if you are surrounded by 5 staff members, and they know their needs, or you're given the supports you need beforehand, you might not recognize that when you're with one staff member and you're not getting those supports, that's when that need comes into play. So seeing something on the bus is going to be different than seeing something in the cafeteria than it is in the classroom with familiar staff. So really thinking about the differences in environments and the tasks that we need. Just a fun quote, for people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. So really thinking about it for our students, for our children, what is going to make them be able to be independent and make some things possible that we didn't think that they could too.
So that's all I have for you guys today. If you have additional questions or you have some follow-up questions you want answered or clarified, feel free to contact me at the email provided. Also, if you have questions about your own specific child, contact your child's IEP team. That's what they're there for. And if you have questions about the process, feel free to contact your Michigan Alliance for Families mentor. Hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar, and now you have some information on how to get the appropriate assistive technology into the hands of your student.